Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith. And today we are going to dip our toes into the world of music licensing, specifically sync licensing and stock music licensing. Now, this is a source of income for musicians that you may not know about if most of your income has been coming from maybe teaching or from performing or doing gigs. Or perhaps you're a composer who's been working on commission and you're hoping to have a more passive income coming in as you're waiting between those jobs. And now, like most things in the music world, there's a bit of a learning curve to this subject. So I've invited Eric Copeland from Make Music Income to come and give us a bit of an overview. And if you're interested in exploring the subject more, we'll give you some resources to help you get started and to really point you in the right direction to learn a lot about it. So a little bit about my guest. Composer, arranger, and producer Eric Copeland has been working in Nashville, Tennessee, and Orlando, Florida for 20 years. His experience as a composer and producer has led to success in music licensing, leading music artists, and making full-time income from music for over 20 years. He is the owner of Make Music Income, a collection of websites and online channels dedicated to helping musicians navigate the world of music production, publishing, and licensing. So Eric, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, great. I'm so glad that you came to be here. You actually just finished doing a live stream talking about this very thing, right?
Yeah, we just, I just felt like sometimes you just have to, when you have a podcast like you do, sometimes you just have to reintroduce what you're all about to your audience, because maybe you've been doing 1,000 different kinds of shows on different things. And so I just did a live for an hour about, or more than an hour about, is full-time music income a myth, and just kind of going through all the income streams, starting though with sync licensing and stock licensing, because they are very, very popular right now.
Right. Now I'm hoping that maybe you can explain a little bit for someone who has never heard of sync licensing or stock licensing. Can you give us just a general overview about what those are?
Sure. Well, sync licensing is probably the most attractive because that is getting your music into television shows, into sports, and into any kind of thing that's on television, including Netflix and all the streaming services. Getting your music into films, feature films, independent films, any kind of film where you would get paid upfront to put your music into a film. Getting your music into advertising, which is where the real money really is getting your music into ads and into commercials and in a Super Bowl commercial or something, or an Apple commercial or something like that. That's where the big money is. And then also, though, there's other places like gaming. Video games are using sync things. Anything that is synced to picture, basically, is what we're talking about here. It's why it's called sync licensing. It's syncing some kind of music to picture. So that is basically sync. Stock music, are we also defining stock right now?
Yes.
Stock music
sure.
is more, if you ever are familiar with going to a website to download a stock picture or a stock video to use in a presentation or something like that, right alongside those is stock music for the same use. So especially you're going to see stock music be used on YouTuber sites, on podcasts, on anything, on corporate meetings and things that anytime someone has a need for a piece of music to use in not a television show or something like that, but use more locally, more on their YouTube channel. YouTube is probably the main use. On Twitch, on any kind of streaming platform or something where they need some music for the background music, that is going to be more like stock. So it's another kind of music licensing, very much like sync, but most of the time on the computer side of things and not on the television, film, and advertising side of things. Although they do cross over together a little bit. Sometimes you get sync and stock, kind of crossing over a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And you do both, right?
I do both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What got you started into this? What's your background?
Well, I've been a composer since I was 13. I started figuring I could write songs when I was when I was a teenager, and then I just became known for that. I just started writing, and you kind of know when you're young that you have a aptitude for something. And I was born in a very musical family. It was very normal to do music in our house, so it wasn't like, oh, what's he doing, making songs? About the only thing my mother would say is, do you have to keep playing the same thing over and over again? But and she was a piano teacher, so she knew when she was sick of hearing something. But and church organist, and my dad was led a band and stuff like that, in addition to working at IBM. But it was a very, very musical household. My brother was a drummer for 40 years, a pro drummer, and my uncle was a producer. So it's a very musical family. And so I just started writing songs all the time. And of course, in the dream back then, when I was writing, when I was a teenager, was to make me get a music publishing deal. That was my big dream, to get a music publishing deal. Maybe people listening to the podcast have always dreamed about that too. If I could only get my music heard by a music publisher, then maybe, just maybe, I might be able to get my music, out to the world somehow.
Right.
And I kept trying that, and I did meet publishers and stuff. Eventually, I started making. You got to be careful with what you try to do, because I started making, as good of demos and recordings as I could of my songs, and made better ones as the years went by. And then suddenly, people started coming to me not for my songs, but for my music production, and then I became a music producer for the next 20 years, and that's what led me to Nashville. And then I had clients coming to Nashville for a decade, they're still going to Nashville and recording. So for over 20 years, I've had people going to Nashville and recording their music, and then helping them with music services and stuff as artists. But over the past about 5 or 6 years ago, I just really decided that I wanted to get back to my roots a little bit. I was getting into a master's degree at that time. And so I decided that I switched my a music master's degree over to composition. I was studying music history, which I'm also a nut about, but I'm a composer, and I was trying to get back to that side of me after 20 plus years of being a music producer for other composers and songwriters. I just decided that it was time for me to get back to that. And at that same time, I had listened to a podcast. Here we are on a podcast, but it all came from a podcast. I was listening to a podcast, and some lady was on there on someone else's show that I listen to all the time, and she was talking about this thing called sync licensing, about how she went from being an artist, a struggling artist, to really hearing about this and focusing on it, and then getting songs into places like Grey's Anatomy and TV shows and stuff like that, and getting stuff onto commercials and stuff, and getting these gigantic paychecks. And it just kind of resonated with me for some reason. I just said, this is really what I want to be doing. I want to be taking all the music that I've been creating for 20 years on my own, and writing and focusing it towards this sync licensing thing. And here's the funny part. It's not just getting into TV shows, getting into films. It is literally the dream that I always had. I just did a video recently that said sync licensing is what you've always wanted, because all I wanted when I was a starting songwriter was to get a music publishing deal. And that's exactly what a sync licensing deal is. It's a music publishing deal, except instead of with a music publisher, it's with a music library that is going to sign you to a music publishing deal and take exactly the same deal as you would sign with a music publisher, 50-50 split. And they work the song for you, trying to get it into TV and film and into other opportunities where the song can make money for both of you, which is exactly what a music publisher did. So I've come full circle. And over the past 5 years, I really focused and still focus on sync licensing. And then about 2 years ago, I started hearing about this stock music licensing side. And I write so many songs that there are plenty that aren't ready for television, aren't ready for movies, whatever. But they were good for stock, and I started kind of putting some of the stuff in there, including and stock music is largely non-exclusive, which means you don't have to worry about putting your personal music in there and then not being able to do what you want with it. You don't sign deals that are exclusive with your music. And you do that with sync. We can talk about that in a minute, but when we talk about the revenue streams. But this didn't let me. So I basically, anything I write that is not for sync licensing specifically, I'll throw in these stock music libraries because you never know. People will use the weirdest things that you have, and you just throw it in there, and one day you get and you can see the videos sometimes of what people have done with your music, and you just like, I would have never thought that somebody would use that track to put in there. It's really interesting, and so stock gives you a way to put a lot of music into possible other uses instead of just sitting on your hard drive. There's no reason that production you made for your album 10 years ago needs to just be sitting in your garage somewhere on the other 500 CDs you didn't sell, but it needs to be, you can be using it in some form of licensing.
Right. Because there's so many different types of projects out there that need just an infinite number of different styles of music. So there really is an opportunity to, like, it doesn't really matter what your genre of music is. There's always a project that needs something.
Yeah. Listen, I wrote a song for my mother's wedding, second wedding, a few years, about 10 years ago or so. And I've had the recording for a long time. I made a recording of it for her. And a year or two ago, I decided, it was just sitting on my drive, I just put it on these stock music sites. And I put the song up there and the track up there. Well, I got a call in the past 5 months or so, or 3 months or so, and somebody said, hey, I want to use this song that I downloaded from Motion Array, which is a stock music library, in a documentary. Can I use it and without paying royalties? I'm like, yeah, it's royalty free. So you can. And he says, cool. He goes, by the way, I looked you up and you're here in Orlando and I am too. I would love to like have lunch with you and show you the use of the song in the documentary. And I was like, okay, cool. So we met. It turns out it's in this documentary, really well done documentary for a church in Louisville, Kentucky, which is near where I grew up in Lexington. And it's for this documentary about a church trying to raise money in an inner city. And they didn't use the words, they just used the track, but it fits perfectly in this documentary behind this person talking for whatever reason. I never would have expected, and if you saw the documentary, you would like, oh, I wouldn't have expected that tune for them to use, but it really works for the use behind this person talking and her story, which is very passionate. And even though the song was for a wedding and it was very smarmy and stuff, for this use, it also worked. It was very, emotional, and it worked behind her vocal. So you just never know,
Yeah. How beautiful is that?
It's very cool.
That's great. Well, and then also you've been doing your original stuff, but lately you've been recording sonatas and classical music. And the use of classical music on these stock libraries has really jumped in the last few years as well.
It really has. I've gotten many things accepted to libraries, both on the stock side and the sync side. I did a whole piano sonatas album just for one of my libraries that's coming out here soon, and then I did another piano sonatas, a bunch of piano sonatas and different classical pieces I've done for my stock libraries too. And they've sold. And one of them, I've had them signed to lots of different kinds of libraries. So I even had a pitch recently for a television show using one of those classical sonatas. So
really,
it's really cool that these things, and that's one thing that people don't realize, your listeners may not even realize, but you can take public domain songs all day long, make versions of them and pitch them to the libraries and record them and put them on Spotify. I think most people think, oh, well, unless I create something, I'm going to have to pay some kind of royalties. And that's mostly true, although there's another library called Crucial Music that is non-exclusive, but they pitch to television and film. And they now have a covers way. They will take care of the cover licensing. So you can submit your recorded covers that are unique to them, and they might sign them. And they've signed several of mine. A Bee Gees song, Staying Alive version, jazzy version I did of that, and then a kind of solo piano version I did of a Genesis song. And so they're both signed, even though they were covers. So covers, public domain songs, originals, all three can be licensed.
Wow. That's
sheet music
impressive.
too. You can
sheet
create
music too, huh?
You can create sheet music, even cover. A lot of the sheet music companies love really creative covers and arrangements of pop music to put on their site, and then they basically pay the rights holders and then pay you a piece of the sale. So
like musicnotes.com, things like those. Yeah. Well, because there's a demand for that. People want to play things that they hear. So that's pretty incredible. So let's talk about this. One thing I'm not sure about, how is sync licensing, if we're talking about films and television, how is that different from a producer or a director calling a composer and saying, here is my film, I want you to score this. Can you explain the difference between those two things?
Yeah, most of the time when stuff is used in a TV show or a movie that is what we would call sync music, it's likely not what they're hiring a score guy to do. Um, it's usually, think of a Lifetime movie, and the girl goes back to her old hometown, and this song comes on for the montage where they're laughing and they're falling in love, and all this stuff is happening. And it's some kind of pop song that's going on behind the song, behind the movie. That's not something the score guy does. That's something that the music supervisor, there's a person called a music supervisor who works for these shows and films, and their job is to go out and find songs that would fit the scene and clear them, which means make sure the rights are all cool and they know who the songwriters are and they know who to pay and all that kind of stuff. And so they're the ones who pick the Taylor Swift song that goes behind that scene, or if they don't have the money, the Eric Copeland song that fits behind that scene, because they don't have enough money to pay for the Taylor Swift song, which is going to cost them $50,000 to use for that use. And they only have a $30,000 budget, or they only have a $10,000 budget, or whatever. And so they know they can go to a library and get a song for $2,000 versus $20,000 or whatever. So if they can't get the Rolling Stones song, they'll go find a sound-alike from some indie artist or from a library that has the same personality, has the same kind of feel, and they will use that song instead. The score stuff, I mean, every once in a while a film doesn't have they're not paying a person to score the film, and they might just need some incidental music or some instrumental music from time to time in the film, and they will use sync stuff they find at sync libraries, or they will know somebody that has some good stuff. But most of the time it's not the score. It's the incidental music. It's the fun music that's going on. It's the jukebox that's playing over in the background that needs to sound like an old Jimmy Buffett song, but it's not a Jimmy Buffett song. So they'll go to a library and look for I'm actually working on 3 Jimmy Buffett type songs for a library right now. And they will find that song and it'll be playing in the background. It's some nondescript Jimmy Buffett-y sounding song about beach and beer. And they don't care because it's behind the scene. It's while the people are talking, and it's not the main song of the show. So that kind of thing is what you're used in. But the best example though would be in a TV show behind a scene or in a montage or something like that. And you see these songs being used. Recently on Stranger Things, they used a song by Kate Bush called "Running Up That Hill," which is an old hit of hers from the 80s, maybe? Certainly from the 80s, because that show's based in the 80s. And it was a huge revival for her as an artist.
Oh, I know. I've heard it everywhere now.
Yeah. In Grey's Anatomy, back in like season 2 or 3, there was a song by an artist called Imogen Heap, who I'm a big fan of. But it was featured in a Grey's Anatomy episode, and people went crazy. Who is this person? Who is this person? And it became a big part of her growth as an artist early on. So it can totally be a star turn for artists, and especially independent artists and or artists you don't know of or haven't heard of in a while, and you go back and say, "Oh, I love that song by Queen. I didn't know they did that." And then it becomes it reinvigorates their whole catalog. So, or it brings an indie artist to light that nobody ever knew of, and then suddenly they become a huge thing. So. Certainly.
So let's talk a little bit about the payment that you were talking about. There's different ways that someone gets paid through syncing their music. Can you explain them?
Okay. So on the sync side of things, on the film, television, advertising side, it's a little different than, they're all different actually. Let's start with television. If a television show decides to go find a song for a montage, and they go to a library and they decide to use that song, they will basically pay the library. It could happen in a couple different ways. There's 2 different types of income. There's what we call the sync income, which is the upfront payment the show would pay the library for that to use that song. But there's also a second royalty that happens called performance royalty, like you get when stuff is played on the radio and you get that through something called a PRO, performance rights organization, like BMI or ASCAP here in the States, or there's different ones around the world. But then the show files that. They file what's called a cue sheet, and they say, we use this song for 1 minute and 58 seconds or something like that. And they send that off to whoever, to the companies like BMI or ASCAP that they have to pay to use that song. So they have to pay kind of an upfront fee and they have to pay a back end fee. Now, some television shows, especially reality shows and things like that, may not pay the upfront fee just because. And libraries are fine sometimes with that because they want all the uses they can get. And and the library, who's the publisher, is in it for 50% as the publisher, and the writer gets 50%, and so we share that. And so what happens is a show in Germany used one of my songs for a bachelor type of show. It's very funny. It's called Bauer sucht Fräulein or something like that. Frau. Bauer sucht Frau, and it's about farmers looking for wives. And so it's basically The Bachelor, except The Bachelor's a farmer. And if you think that's funny, there's a Fox show coming on called Farmers
I know,
Seek
I've
Wives.
seen, yeah.
So America is now pulling that show in. It's been a 20-year show like The Bachelor in Germany.
Really?
And and it's really cool. Again, my stuff is used. This song called I Keep Falling in Love with You keeps being used on this one scene with this one couple, that lasts through the whole show. So that show pays an upfront to the library or not, but still they file a cue sheet that says we played this song for this many minutes. They send that off. It eventually gets back to BMI, which I'm a member of, and BMI eventually and then figures out how much the song is worth and how much that play is worth, and they pay 50% to me and to my PRO, to my BMI account, and 50% to the publisher's BMI account. And now that whole process can take a year. From the minute they air it to you getting something on your statement, and we only get that statement every quarter, So if something gets, I think something got played last summer. No, I got the things I've gotten paid for recently have been Christmas stuff from 2021. So in November, I got money from December of 2021 Christmas songs that were played. And they were, by the way, they were classical pieces. So public domain classical pieces that I got paid for. That's how long it takes in the back end. And the quote unquote front end, I just got some sync payments after 2 years with some of these libraries for the upfront fees I'm getting 2 years later. So it's a long game in sync licensing because it just takes. The TV shows have to file. BMI and ASCAP are notorious for taking 9 months to process all the payments and all that stuff. So, and who knows when they get it from the show and all that kind of stuff. And the cue sheets have to be filed correctly. So it is a long game of income on that. There are some libraries that pay up front for songs against your royalties, very much like an advance that you get in a record deal. But that doesn't happen that often. They don't have to do that, and so they don't. And so they just take your songs, and then they try to get uses, and then you get paid later down the road. Now, that's sync licensing, and that's television. Film and advertising pretty much pay upfront because there's not always a lot of, in the States, films don't have to pay performance royalties. They do around the world, but they don't in the States. So it's usually an upfront fee, and the movie will pay $10,000 to use your song in their movie. And it's an upfront fee that they pay to, let's say it's with a library, they'll pay to the library. And by the way, you can do sync licensing without a library. You can do it directly with the music supervisor, but that's a little bit harder to get, one song to one's music supervisor the minute they need it. That's you have to have a relationship with a lot of music supervisors to work that way. And I know people who do, but I work with libraries just because I think it's easier to catch more fish with a big library like that people go search. So, and then commercials work pretty much the same way, upfront payments. I had a commercial possibility last year with another co-writer of mine, and this was a song that we had accepted by a library, but it hadn't been put in the library yet. And a company came along and wanted to use that song for their company song. And they were not a nationwide company, they were a regional company. but we had negotiated a price of about $30,000 for the buyout use of that song. In other words, they get to use it for all time. They wouldn't take ownership of the copyright necessarily, but they would be the only people who could use it, be very exclusive to them for this price. That did not happen for whatever reason, but I have worked in music for companies, for car dealerships and different things, and it regularly is $4,000 or $5,000 for a 60-second spot for advertising. So advertising and commercials is very lucrative, and you want to get involved in that. I always tell people that television can pay anywhere from $2,000 to $25,000, or from $750 for a use on a show to $30,000 for a use on a show. Film could pay anywhere from $5,000 for a use to $50,000 for a use. But marketing, commercials could pay, a good Apple commercial could pay over six figures. And so there are gigantic possibilities for income from sync licensing.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's sync. Stock pays a little different. You want me to go into that next?
Sure. Yeah.
So stock music is simpler. You basically put stuff in the library, and whatever it sells, you split with the library, whatever the split is. And they usually pay in 30 days. They usually pay by the 15th of next month if you have so much that you've made in sales on those stock libraries. So that's what I would call a sync license. I mean, a sync payment, kind of upfront payment. You get, once they sell it, you just split whatever was there. And those aren't necessarily 50-50 deals. Sometimes they're more 65-35 deals, where we're getting 35% as the composer, and the library's getting 65%. But that stuff is usually paid the next month. So it's not as long a wait for that music. And then there is a back end to stock licensing called Content ID. Since most of the stuff that is downloaded from stock libraries is used on websites or specifically YouTube videos, Content ID is basically the PRO of YouTube. They listen to everything that's being played there, as you know, and they pay the rights holders of the music that is being played on the videos. And unless it's been whitelisted or something, and the person can get out of that claim. But Content ID was my second most highest income last year from stock music. So it is a real deal. And I use a company that tracks that and pays. And so that's very cool.
Wow. So it's nice to have a combination of both the sync and the stock.
Yeah, I think so. It is for me as a composer, because not everything I write fits in the sync world. It doesn't fit a TV show or a movie, but it could have some odd use, like for a documentary down the road, or for somebody's creepy spider video, or for somebody's emotional ping pong video, which are all things that I have.
I know all about the ping pong videos. My son loves those. Loves them.
So I'm getting ready to do a video about where my music is used, and it's really cool to see all these uses, and you wouldn't expect these uses. So
right, yeah. Now it seems the way you were talking there, it seems to be quite complicated, and we absolutely don't have time to go through everything that you've been talking about. But you have actually written the book about this. And you have lots of resources. So if someone's listening to this and they really think, oh, wow, this is something that is interesting to me, how can they find you and find out more about the nitty gritty?
Yeah. I've written ebooks on both sync licensing and stock licensing, and how to get involved with them, and how my journey on both of them, and what happened with me. My whole channel is all about what is happening with me in reality, and not what could happen necessarily. I mean, a little bit of what could happen, but they can just go to makemusicincome.com, and that is the website for everything. And on YouTube, it's just Make Music Income. And on Instagram, it's Make Music Income. It's Make Music Income everywhere, but they can just go to makemusicincome.com, and they'll see the different ebooks that are there, including the newest one called Getting in Sync. And they're very inexpensive, and just I'm working on courses for everything, but these two are the hot button topics for sure: sync licensing and stock music licensing, because they're passive. You do them, you send them off to the library, and then there's no more work. It's not like doing gigs all the time to make money down the road from it. You just sit and wait. It's like fishing. So it's very interesting to people.
Well, yeah, especially, just coming through the pandemic, when a lot of our gig income has dried up, having these other types of passive income that's a really important thing for a professional musician.
And that's when they kind of took off, is during the pandemic and stuff. Everybody was stuck at home and they were looking for musical things they could do. And sync licensing and stock music were just, wow, I can make money sitting here in my pajamas making music and sending it off to these libraries. Sign me up. And I was one of those people, although I was already really focused on sync licensing long before the pandemic hit. But it certainly was something we could keep doing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're also a teacher, and like you said, you have all these courses to help other musicians. What are some mistakes that you see that beginning musicians just getting into this type of licensing make that kind of hinder them from really progressing?
The biggest the biggest thing that people make, and I don't have to tell this to the people who are watching this podcast or you, is that most people quit. Most people just don't stay with music long enough to become either good at it or make income from it, because they just get discouraged. They move on to another hobby. They don't feel that they are good enough. They have imposter syndrome. They just don't think that they could do this like someone else could do this. And the people who succeed don't do that. The people who succeed stay in this like you've done, like I've done, like everybody I know in music has done. They have stayed in music. They didn't start a degree in it and then quit and go start a degree in something else. They stayed in music, because there are stories, and I've had clients through the years, and it's the same story over and over again. I did music when I was young, but then I started a family, or I got a job, and I just got into something else, and I had to give music up for a while, or I just went. Well, they didn't have to give music up, but they did, and I think that's the biggest issue with anything you do, but especially a craft. If you don't stay on that craft, if you don't become a seasoned craftsman at your craft, then you're not going to have success. And it just takes. I've seen people who weren't any more talented than anybody else, but they stuck at it and they worked as hard as they could, and became very talented and became very good at what they did. Artists, songwriters, anything in music, players. I've seen people become great, just depending on their work ethic and how hard they stuck with it. And to me, that's the ultimate secret. I am still here because I'm still here. I still get music jobs because people call me up and go, Eric, you still do music? And I say, yep. And they said, well, here's $500. And so, that is a secret of mine that I've had for a long time. People would just call me up and say, do you still do music? I'd say, yep. Well, I still have a song I want you to do. So that's just, to me, that's the ultimate secret. And probably the other secret I would say, and I've said this before on other shows, is that don't be afraid to start your own thing when you don't know if you have what it takes for a specific publisher. After about 5 years of banging my head up against the wall, driving back and forth to Nashville, trying to get a publisher to listen to my genius, I just decided to make my own business and do my own thing. In a similar way that I started my YouTube channel. I just had something to say that was my own. And so I did it, and I started my own thing. And now it is what it is. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But, you just say, hey, listen, I need to start this thing, and I can't just keep waiting for someone else to come to me and say, oh, you need to start it, or we want to sponsor you to start it, or we want to sign you, kid, because, you're a big star. You've just got to do your own thing. And we live in a world now that you couldn't do what we can do. You couldn't do this podcast 20 years ago. You would have to have done it on AOL or something like that, or you would have had to make CDs and DVDs and send them around to everybody. We have this amazing technology now that we can do all these things, and everyone needs to take advantage of it in order to make more music income and start their own thing. And I think most people are just afraid to do that.
Yeah, there's an aspect of risk in there, but the rewards are spectacular. They really are. Well, I really appreciate you coming and kind of wetting our whistle, letting us dip our toes in. The world of sync licensing is very deep. And so if this is interesting to anybody, please, I really encourage them to look at all of your content that make music income.
There is
I have learned quite a bit from it. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think I've only scratched the surface. So I highly recommend that to everybody.
Cool.
So Eric Copeland, thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks so much for getting in touch, and can't wait to look at and absorb more of your podcasts on my daily trips across town to teach, which I listen to podcasts all day long. So,
oh, thank you.